So how much do you know about the exposure triangle? ISO, shutter speed, aperture? Well, let's find out together. Stay tuned for more.
Here I am, Vietnam. Rain is always coming down.
Camera talk with Dr. Scott. Alright, today we're going to be looking at K.I.S.S, the exposure triangle. What does that mean? Well, K.I.S.S stands for K.I.S.S, is keep it short and simple. So basically what I'm going to be doing today is looking at the exposure triangle in as much of a simplified fashion as possible. You know, again, this is all meant for beginners. If you want something more in-depth, more scientific, more technical, there's a million YouTube channel videos out there that you can check those out, and maybe I'll link a few to this particular video that you can check out in depth. Adorama has some you know, good videos that dive into this a little deeper. But really, I just want to go an overview of this just to give you guys an idea of really how exposure affects your photography, affects your pictures. Because you think of exposure with photography, it's dealing with something that's too light, something that's too dark, something that's maybe too blurry, or something too grainy. You know, and all of that is true, and the exposure triangle is something that addresses those problems. So what I've done here is, up on the board, I've included pretty much everything you kind of need to know to get an overview of it. So here we have the triangle,
infamous golden triangle.
And you know, if you've seen any other videos on this, or you've discussed this with other people, you'll know that it's made up of three factors that your camera deals with in order to get you the best possible picture. And it is shutter speed, ISO, and aperture. So it's a combination of these three things that get you the ideal picture, which tells the story that you're looking to do. So on auto mode, you know, which is when you pick up your camera from the store, or order it online, you open the box and you turn it on. Most cameras by default have the auto mode, which means the camera is going to determine the settings for these three features in your camera to get whatever it thinks is the best possible photograph. Now, as you get into photography, of course, you want to start to get a little more control over you know, your artistic impression of what you want your photos to look like. So you start to play with these numbers. Now, of course, the die-hard photographers out there, and there's plenty of them, you know, you'll find the more you get into photography, the more you'll discover that photographers are all experts in everything. So everybody's very picky on what they think is the best possible way. And of course, the die-hard photographers out there, the professionals, say it has to be manual. It must be manual mode to be a real man. Which means you control all of these three. There is no you know, onboard computer in your camera is not making any decisions at all. But in the real world, many photographers actually don't do manual mode all the time. A lot of them will go in aperture priority or shutter priority. So anyway, you know, it's again just to simplify things. So I'm going to try and keep it short and simple here, in relation to what these really mean to you. So starting on the one side here, shutter speed. Now, shutter speed is, you know, if you look at the cross section of a camera here, you know, the way this works, the way I've drawn this out here, is light comes into your camera lens. It goes through this part here called the aperture, which is the opening in the lens to allow in a certain amount of light. Now before that, light can be taken as a picture, as a photograph by the sensor. There's a shutter which opens and closes to allow that light to actually strike the sensor. Now, of course, it's not strike like bang, strike, but it's strike as in
Striker, 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 striker.
The photons from the light source are actually being picked up by the sensor. So the shutter again is a certain speed, and this is a typical scale here of an example shutter speed scale, starting with an eighth of a second to 15th to 30th to 60th one. You'll notice as they double as they go up, and each one of these is known as a stop of light. And again, technical term, you don't really have to know what that's all about. You just have to know that this scale means as you're going up, it's the faster. So in terms of light or dark when you're outside or in a room, with bad lighting or whatever, obviously you would need a low shutter speed to keep the shutter open long enough to allow that little low light to get in there to give the sensor enough to create a photograph with that. So that's with light. Now with things like motion, you need faster shutter speed to be able to catch that motion, to freeze it, so to speak. If you take a moving car or a person at slower shutter speeds, you're going to get motion blur. Now, of course, that could be accidental or it could be on purpose, depending on the nature of your photograph. So that's shutter speed. Again, I'm just going to keep this simple, give you an idea of how this works. Aperture is again looking here as the light comes into the lens. The aperture is the inside, allowing a certain amount of light to enter in. I'll use this lens here as an example. This is a vintage lens. This is a Canon FD 55 millimeter 1.2, and 1.2 is what they call a fast aperture range here. It has the largest opening, and that's what again, because this is a keep it simple, keep it short and simple lesson. The smaller the number, the bigger the hole. The larger the number, the smaller the hole. It may not make sense, but that's just the way they've determined what this is. And there's a mathematical equation related to this too. 1.2, you take this example, this is a 55 millimeter lens. So 55 divided by 1.2, you get 45 or 46. And that tells you that 45 or 46 millimeter is the actual size of this hole in here, because this is at f.12. And as you see, get my hand out of the way here.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
The aperture opens and closes. That's the aperture as it's going from f1.2 all the way to f16. Now, a lot of lenses, especially modern lenses, now go up to f22, but this particular one just goes to f16. So that opening and closing of the aperture is allowing in a certain amount of light. So that's an example, just using this particular lens here. So now your aperture, again, allowing in that certain amount of light, has to be balanced. So this triangle has to be a happy camper. When one side does something, the other side has to compensate to make up for that. So it's a balance. So again, let's say you're doing landscape or portrait type photography. Aperture is going to be more of what your concern will be, because you're looking at depth of field, which means what is in focus. In portraiture, for example, a lot of times the photographer wants to focus on the face, so therefore the background should be blown out of focus, you know, with some nice bokeh or just blurry background. For landscape photography, they're more likely looking at the smaller aperture, which allows the greater depth of field, which means you're getting much more in focus in your photograph. So therefore, you know, it gets the whole landscape, gets the mountains and the lake and the trees and flowers and the bunny rabbits and all that kind of stuff. Is in focus. So that's why aperture is so important for this type of photography. So for portraiture, you know, where you want things blown out in the background, where you're at the low end of the scale here, where you have the widest aperture, so letting in the most light, your shutter speed on the other side has to compensate. So if you're down here at the f1.2 to f2.8, your shutter speed by default is going to be up here at this speed to be able to you know, make the best photograph that you can with this larger aperture. And so therefore, if you start moving this up the scale here, which means you're closing down your aperture as you come up, your shutter speed is also going to come down until they match each other. So like let's say at f5.6 to f8 or f11 is going to have, you know, 125, 250, 500, you know, in that range as a shutter speed by default to come up with the best compensation to get the best quality exposure in your photograph. Now, when you know, this is a perfect scenario. So if you're getting great weather conditions and whatnot, that's where these two come into play. Now, if you get on a cloudy day where the sun's not that great,
the sun will come out tomorrow,
and your shutter speed cannot match your aperture opening because you don't have enough light to come in, that's where ISO comes in. And what ISO is it tells your sensor how sensitive it can be to light. So it's basically, it's not telling it to, but it's you know, using again the onboard computer to determine how much sensitivity will be allowed by the sensor in your camera. And you know, you can look at that as gain, or you know, there's a lot of technical terms to deal with that. But it's basically just turning up the sensitivity or turning it down. So as you go up the scale, it makes your sensor more sensitive to that light, so that it can compensate for you know, for that imbalance. You know, if you can't properly balance these two together, that's where ISO comes in to make that difference. What, you know, the benefit of using a feature like auto ISO in this regard is, you know, let's say you are, you know, either going aperture mode or shutter priority, or even manual. You know, you can still put it on auto ISO and let the camera determine, you know, what's best with that. But you can also set parameters. You could set a low of 100 and a high of 800 or 1600. Some cameras do decent at 3200, but still, it's, you know, you start introducing more what they call noise, which is grainy, almost like sand into your photograph, little spots here and there. So the higher your ISO, the more grainy your photograph is going to look. And you know, again, depending on your artistic vision is for your photograph, you may want that look. You know, it may look cool to you. But most photographers keep in this range here between 100 and 800 in that. You know, they don't like to go too much higher than that, just because it introduces more noise into the picture. Now, you know, I mentioned landscape portrait, you know, focus more on aperture. Well, the opposite with sports and wildlife, where you have motion, you have things moving quickly, and you want to capture that moment as you know, as LeBron James slams that basketball into the net, or as that cheetah, you know, lunges for that gazelle just as in the last second kind of thing. And you want to, as a photographer, you want to capture that moment. just before, you know, the cheetah makes contact or whatnot. You need fast shutter speeds in order to capture that moment. Unless you're looking for blur. You know, again, some photographers like the blur motion to show motion, to which you want to bring that shutter speed down. But to capture motion, though, you need high shutter speeds. And of course, with high shutter speeds, that means your aperture is going to be, by default, it needs to be balanced. So it's going to be down. It's going to be open, which means now your depth of field is going to be off. You know, if you're trying to shoot something far away, it's very difficult to do with low apertures because of the depth of field. And you know, again, depth of field is something that's a completely different video. You know, we can look at that in a different time. But again, it's compensated by, you know, keeping your aperture higher, using the ISO to balance out this triangle. So that's really, in a nutshell, what I want to get to about the exposure triangle, and about you know, trying to balance your photograph in the best way possible so that it's not overexposed or underexposed. You know, it's really looked at because you know, the cameras nowadays are mini computers, and the light meter that's in there, you know, plays its own part by, again, reading the available light and determining which one of these is going to be the best one to compensate, depending, again, if you're in complete manual mode or if you're in aperture priority or shutter priority. Each one will have an effect on that. So that's kind of where I want to just leave this off. Again, it's just an introduction to the exposure triangle. There's a lot of great videos out there to get more in depth into the technical side of things. But you know, that here at Modesty Photography, I want to keep everything relatively simple. I just want it in layman's terms so that beginners can understand, you know, the values of you know, what we're talking about here. So so take it for what it is. If you want to do further research, as I tell my students at the university, you know, if you want to become an expert in something, you have to do a lot of research and really dive into the subject to fully understand it. But as a beginner, this is pretty much all you really need to know to at least get an overview of how important this is, how important your shutter speed is to balance with your aperture, and when they don't balance correctly, how you can use ISO to compensate, to balance things out. You know, the downside of using ISO 2 when you start getting up too high, you know, you can see that. And I would love to show you some examples of that, but I don't want this to be a long video, so.
That's what she said.
As I said, there's plenty of other ones out there you could see. I just want to give you my version. So anyhow, thanks for dropping by. You know, if you want to see more of these videos, please, you know, hit the subscribe button. I'm getting up to break that 100 subscriber barrier, which is cool. You know, I just started this channel a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago. Actually, it was just after my son. I just had a baby boy. He's 1 month tomorrow. He'll be a month old. So yeah, I'm busy doing a lot of things and trying to do these videos and do online course sessions. You know, because we're in the still in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic. So hopefully everybody out there is staying safe. You wash your hands, you use social distancing, wear that face mask, don't touch your face. And you know, it's great to see you. Come on back for some more. And as I said, hit that subscribe button, help me, you know, build these numbers and get the word out there. Again, thanks for dropping by. We'll see you, and have yourself a great weekend.